Greek speculation about the origin and nature of the universe did not by any means begin where most histories of philosophy make it begin, with Thales of Miletus, but he was the first who expressed his ideas in logical and not mythological terms. Most significant of all is the fact that he assumed, in spite of appearances, that the world consists not of many things, but one. Here we meet a permanent feature of Greek thought. The universe, both the physical and the moral universe, must be not only rational and therefore knowable, but also simple. The apparent multiplicity of physical things is only superficial. Hey, I'm Matt, and welcome to Nothing New, where we explore the ancient roots of modern culture. Today, we're going to be talking about Thales of Miletus, a famous Greek mathematician often credited with being the first philosopher. While it's obvious that he was not the first person to think philosophically, as the opening quote points out, the originality in his thought has left a lasting influence on later philosophers. Like most of the pre-Socratic figures, we only have the fragments of his thought that are preserved in later writers like Plato and Aristotle. In fact, there are only two recorded sayings that can be reliably attributed to him, and they show us how philosophy still bordered between science and religion. One of them was, "All things are full of gods," and the other was, "Water is the first principle of everything." Though his main interests were in mathematics and physics, he was still said to have sacrificed an ox in celebration of his discovery of what would become known as Thales' theorem. Whether that story is true or not, it illustrates how philosophy had not yet wholly divorced itself from the mystical and religious. So what was he talking about when he says, "All things are full of gods," and that water is the first principle of everything? According to philosopher A.C. Grayling, one might reconstruct his thinking as follows. Water is ubiquitous. It is in the sea, it falls from the sky, it runs in your veins. If you cut a plant, you see that it has liquid inside. If you rub a clod of earth in your hands, it is damp. We and all animals and plants die without it, and therefore it is essential for life. Moreover, water could be said to produce the earth itself, for you need only look at the vast quantities of soil produced by the Nile as it floods every year. And moreover again, as a kind of clincher, water is the only substance Thales knew that can occupy all three material states. But what the heck does he mean when he says all things are full of gods? While the Greeks loved to personify and anthropomorphize the gods in their art, to the philosopher, the gods were the principal forces of the universe, whether it's the forces of nature or the forces of human emotion. Similarly, the soul was the principle of life, its animating force. To say that everything is full of gods is to say that everything is driven by something, perhaps an unseen force like magnetism, which is why he thought that lodestones, a naturally magnetic mineral, had souls. What Thales was therefore groping for was an account that would allow a generalization from such phenomena as my experience of agency and the magnet's power to move iron, to an inclusive explanation for alterations of place and state. How else, without a vocabulary yet sufficient for the purpose, to talk of this than to say a magnet has a soul, thereby meaning an animating principle, a power of causation or of interaction with other things. Like many early philosophers, there is a wealth of stories surrounding Thales and his discoveries, which have been largely recorded by the famous biographer Diogenes Laertius. According to him, Thales was not only the first to study astronomy, the first to predict eclipses of the sun, and the first to fix the solstices, but also the first to maintain the immortality of the soul. Thales was able to determine the distance of ships at sea and was the first to actually measure the height of the pyramids. His method shows the ingenuity of these thinkers. He simply measured the shadow of the pyramids at the same time of day when his own shadow was as long as he was tall. Pretty clever. It is for these many achievements that he would earn a place as one of the 7 sages of Greece. He was also the first philosopher to be mocked for having his head in the clouds. According to Plato's version of the story, While he was studying the stars and looking upwards, he fell into a pit, and a neat, witty Thracian servant girl jeered at him. They say, because he was so eager to know the things in the sky that he could not see what was there before him at his very feet. The same jest applies to all who pass their lives in philosophy. To prove the worth of his studies, he used his knowledge of the weather to predict a particularly good year for olives, and with this foreknowledge, he bought up all the olive presses and made a fortune on the monopoly. According to Aristotle, this was not to enrich himself, but to prove to others that philosophy could be useful, contrary to the criticism we'll see later from figures like the comic playwright Aristophanes. His influence will be seen throughout Greek philosophy, primarily in two other famous philosophers from his hometown, Anaximander and Anaximenes, who along with Thales make up what's called the Milesian school. As we study these thinkers in their own upcoming videos, it's important to keep in mind what the pre-Socratic scholar Robin Waterfield has to say about the connection between their thought. It makes sense to group Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes, but the idea that they were a school and formed master-pupil relationships is certainly a distortion, based on the later desire to systematize which bedevils pre-Socratic studies in various ways. As far as we can tell, they wanted to give a comprehensive picture and explanation of the whole universe, from the largest scale down to everyday phenomena such as rain and mist and rainbows. At the very birth of science and philosophy, the daring of this enterprise is breathtaking. Their distinctive approach is to explain things by looking to their origins, in a biological sense. The world arose by spontaneous generation out of more or less undifferentiated matter, which itself has the properties of life and growth. This video was just an introduction to the Milesian school, which we'll be covering more over the next few weeks. But first, I want to talk about one of the most interesting and peculiar features of Greek democratic life, the practice of ostracism. That's coming up next week. I hope you're excited, and I'll see you then.